What if you could disarm a toxic manipulator with just one sentence? A sentence that doesn't spark a fight, doesn't give them fuel, and doesn't even raise your voice. If you've ever felt like your emotions were hijacked, your thoughts twisted, and your reality slowly rewritten by someone who always plays the victim but never takes responsibility, this message is for you. In this video, we're going to uncover a psychological boundary so powerful, so quietly defiant, that those who once controlled you won't know how to respond. This isn't about drama, it's about peace. Not silence rooted in fear, but silence born of clarity and power. And once you learn it, there's no turning back. Because the truth once seen cannot be unseen. So if you're ready to reclaim your inner strength, hit subscribe, stay with us until the very end, and share this video with someone who needs this message. Because your healing begins the moment you stop playing by their rules. You know what truly unsettles a manipulator? It's not when you scream, it's not when you call them out, and it's not even when you tell them how deeply they've hurt you. What terrifies them is when you go quiet, but not confused, when you stop justifying, when you stop fixing, when you stop hoping that one day they'll see your worth. They survive off your reaction, they feed on your pain, your tears, your pleas to just understand each other. But then, one day, you wake up and there's nothing left to say. No more anger, no more heartbreak, just silence. The kind that comes after a storm has passed and you realize you've survived. And when they come back, running the same tired script, you don't rage, you don't explain, you don't engage, you look them in the eye, no hatred, no fear, and say, "This space is no longer open for manipulation." That sentence isn't a threat, it's a declaration. It marks the end of an era and the beginning of your return to yourself. It doesn't need to be shouted, doesn't accuse, and doesn't seek to win, but in its simplicity and finality lies its immense power, because it removes what every manipulator fears most: access to your inner world. Manipulators don't control with fists or shouting, they control through questions that go in circles, through twisted logic, through emotional fog that keeps you disoriented. They make you question yourself, your memory, your emotions, even your worth. And slowly, without noticing, you begin to shrink yourself to fit inside the distorted reality they've created. In that reality, you're not allowed to be angry, not allowed to be sad, not allowed to express pain. Every time you speak your truth, they call you too sensitive, dramatic, or accuse you of always playing the victim. They don't deny events, they deny your existence within them, and in that toxic space you get pulled into a destructive loop. You try to explain, they dismiss you. You try to adjust, they criticize you. You try to love, they exploit you. You live in reaction mode, and they live in control. So when you say, "This space is no longer open for manipulation," you are not just closing a conversation. You are revoking the privilege of access they once had to your emotions and your mental clarity. You're telling the world, and yourself, that you are no longer a person who reacts, but a person who chooses. You're no longer arguing to be heard. You're no longer explaining to be accepted. You're no longer crying to make someone change. You're stepping away from the board, not flipping the table, not storming out, just walking away with unshakable calm. And that is the exact moment where manipulation breaks, because manipulation cannot survive without your participation. This sentence doesn't trigger their defenses. It doesn't insult, attack, or accuse. It gives them no opportunity to twist the narrative or play the victim. It is simple, it is clear, and it closes the gate to the psychological space they once freely entered. But more importantly, this sentence creates a sacred boundary, a mental space where you protect your clarity, your peace, and your emotional sovereignty. It's a space no longer available for blame, chaos, or fake apologies. A space where only truth, silence, and your authentic self are allowed to exist. Psychologically, this is what's known as withdrawing energy from a manipulative system. When you stop reacting, you remove the fuel. There's nothing left for them to feed on. No leverage, no drama, no power. That's when they panic. They'll try to reopen the door with old tactics, bring up past guilt, fake remorse, reverse the blame, or flood you with emotional noise. But if you stand firm, if you no longer walk back into their story, they are left with the one thing they've been running from their entire lives, their own inner emptiness. They don't fear losing you. They fear losing the role you played in their psychological game. When you no longer reflect back their chaos, they can no longer uphold the illusion of control. And that sentence, in the most literal sense, is the door slamming shut on their false identity. The beauty of it is, you don't have to scream it, you don't have to write it out, you can say it with your silence, with your eyes, with your decision not to answer that message, not to pick up that call, not to explain anything further. And when you hold that line consistently, when you don't waver, don't explain, don't get pulled in by tears or threats, what happens next is not just escape, it's a return to yourself. You are no longer someone who fears being misunderstood. You are someone who stands in truth. You are no longer a prisoner of emotional chaos. You are someone who chooses what deserves your energy. And that's the most powerful realization of all. You don't have to defeat them, you just have to become undefeatable through detachment. You don't need revenge. You don't need to be right. You don't even need closure. You just need to know that from now on, your peace is not up for negotiation. And with one sentence, you've made it clear. This space is no longer open for manipulation. At first, they won't believe you. They've seen you set boundaries before, the times you said you were leaving, the times you cried but stayed, the times you tried to act strong, but one apology, one guilty glance, and you came back. So when you say now, this space is no longer open for manipulation, they'll assume it's temporary. They'll test it. They'll push your limits. They'll check to see if this time is really different. They might laugh. They might fake hurt. They might look at you confused and say, "What are you even talking about?" But then, when you don't explain yourself, when you don't fall into the emotional trap, when you don't try to clarify your point of view like before, that's when something begins to shift, not in you, but in them, from smugness to confusion, from confusion to panic, because now they feel it. This isn't just a threat, this is reality, and in that reality they are locked out. You're no longer letting them hijack your emotions. You're no longer available to be provoked, derailed, or drained. You've taken your power back, and they're completely lost. And then comes the part no one warns you about. They will escalate. Not because you're wrong, but because your boundary is finally working. They'll call you names. They'll accuse you of being cold, distant, unloving. They'll say, "You're not who you used to be." And they're right. You're not who you used to be. You're no longer someone who bleeds to prove your love. You're no longer someone who bends yourself into silence just to keep the peace. You're no longer someone who needs to justify your worth to someone who never saw it. And that change terrifies them, because if you can resist them once, you can resist them forever. And once they realize their tricks no longer work, they don't just lose you, they lose the stage. No audience, no mirror, no target. They're left with what they fear most, the emptiness inside themselves. They don't fear losing you. They fear losing the role you used to play in their narrative. When you no longer reflect their chaos, they no longer have anything to project onto. And that sentence, "This space is no longer open for manipulation," becomes a wall they cannot breach. The best part is, you don't need to scream it, you don't need to type it out, you can say it with your eyes, with your silence. With the decision to not answer the call, to not reply to the message, to not explain ever again. And when you hold that boundary with consistency, when you don't waver, don't explain, don't pity their crocodile tears, what happens next isn't just escape, it's a return to yourself. No longer the person living for someone else's approval, no longer begging to be understood, You are someone who now knows. No one gets to touch your peace unless you allow it. And that is what manipulators fear most. A person who no longer seeks their validation. A person who is at peace with being misunderstood. A person who walks away, not out of anger, but because peace is the only language they'll speak from now on. So let them call you heartless. Let them twist the story. Let them paint you as the villain. But don't go back. Don't explain. Don't crack the door. Not even a little, because the moment you start explaining why you chose peace, you've already given them the opening they were hoping for. Stay still, stay clear, stay silent. With power, because this sentence, this space is no longer open for manipulation, is not an ending, it's a beginning. You may feel lonely. There might be mornings when you wake up with an unfamiliar emptiness in your chest because you've been manipulated for so long that when peace finally arrives, you don't quite know what to do with it. But let me tell you this, that's a sign you're healing. Not every silence is emptiness. Sometimes it's the space you need to hear your own voice again, the voice that was once drowned beneath someone else's judgment. No one defines you anymore. No one twists your emotions at will. You no longer need someone's understanding to know your worth. You no longer need to be the version of yourself that's easy to please, easy to hurt, easy to forgive, just to keep someone who never had any real intention of keeping you through love. Today, you chose something different. You chose clarity. You chose peace. You chose yourself. And if you've ever doubted whether a single sentence could change everything, just look back at your journey. You are no longer the person who begged, who cried, who forgot their own value just to hold on to a love that only hurt. Now, you don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to scream to be believed. You only need to speak with calm, with certainty, with unwavering strength. This space is no longer open for manipulation. And then you go silent. Not because you're weak, but because you have nothing left to prove. That sentence is the closing of one chapter, but the beginning of another life. A life where you no longer live in fear, no longer shrink under someone's stare, no longer let love be confused with pain and endurance. From this moment forward, you walk, not hurriedly, not desperately, but grounded and awake. You don't seek justice anymore, because the peace you now carry in your heart is the highest justice you could ever offer yourself. And if you're still here, listening to these final words, then I want you to remember this. You are no longer a victim. You are a survivor. You are awakened. You are someone who ends the cycle of emotional abuse with a sentence more powerful than any scream. This space is no longer open for manipulation. And then you might ask yourself, what happens if they come back, if they apologize? Because after everything, you stood your ground. You didn't react. You walked away in silence. And they no longer had access to your inner world, and now they return with a message, a late-night call, a carefully worded text that says exactly what you once longed to hear. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I didn't realize how much you meant to me until you were gone. That's when you need to be more alert than ever, because an apology is not always repentance. Sometimes it's just another form of manipulation, wrapped in softness but rooted in the same old intention, control. You must ask yourself, are they apologizing because you were hurt or because they lost control over you? Do they miss you, or do they miss the reflection of themselves they saw through your emotional devotion? Are they coming back out of love, or because they cannot stand that you withdrew from the game they thought they always had the upper hand in? Don't let the words, "I'm sorry," lure you back into a battlefield you just escaped. Don't let memories of early affection make you forget the nights you cried alone, questioning your worth. The truth is, someone who's truly remorseful doesn't rely on words. They show it through consistent behavior. Someone who has truly changed won't chase you back. They will respect the space you needed to heal. Someone who truly loves you doesn't make you doubt yourself. doesn't hurt you repeatedly and then ask for forgiveness just because they know how to say sorry. So if they return with flowers, with tears, with that familiar voice that once made you weak, pause, breathe, and remember, an apology without action is just a tactic. If you open the door again just because of the words, "I'm sorry," you're teaching them that your pain doesn't need healing, it just needs to be sweet-talked away, and you deserve more than that. You deserve a love that doesn't require endless apologies, because it doesn't keep repeating the same wounds. You deserve a connection that doesn't demand you to shrink yourself just to be kept. So when the manipulator comes back with an apology, don't ask, are they sincere? Ask yourself, am I willing to risk the peace I just rebuilt for the chance to try again with someone who once shattered me? And if your answer is no, then you have officially entered a new chapter, one where apologies are no longer a ticket back in, but merely a reflection of a past you've already outgrown. But sometimes the line between a sincere apology and a manipulative one is razor thin, and the greatest danger isn't that you forgive, it's that you don't realize you're being pulled back into the same cycle. You may have learned to walk away. You may have rediscovered your peace, but if you haven't learned how to see through the apologies designed to drag you back, then you haven't truly broken free from the cycle of emotional control. So how do you know when an apology isn't genuine but calculated? Here are 5 unmistakable signs of a manipulative apology that you must learn to recognize. Sign 1. They say, "I'm sorry," but still place the blame on you. It often starts like this: "I'm sorry if you felt hurt." Sounds polite, doesn't it? But here's the truth. They're not apologizing for what they did. They're apologizing for your feelings. This subtle twist suggests that the problem wasn't their behavior, but your emotional response. They shift the spotlight away from their actions and onto your sensitivity. This is psychological manipulation in disguise, making you question your emotional validity. A sincere apology owns the harm caused. A manipulative one reframes the narrative to avoid accountability. Sign 2, they apologize but immediately pressure you to move on. As soon as the apology is out of their mouth, you hear, "Let it go already. You should forgive me by now. Why are you still bringing this up? We'll never have peace this way." Why is this manipulation? Because they want forgiveness without consequence. True remorse isn't afraid to sit with discomfort. It doesn't rush your healing. If someone apologizes but can't tolerate hearing how they hurt you, they're not seeking reconciliation. They're seeking closure on their terms. They don't want to repair what was broken. They just want you to stop talking about it. Sign 3. They apologize, but their behavior doesn't change. They say they're sorry, they cry, they write long, heartfelt messages, they say you mean everything to them. But a week later, it's the same disregard, the same passive aggression, the same emotional games, because an apology without behavioral change is an apology without soul. A truly remorseful person will change the way they treat you, not just for a day, but consistently and voluntarily. If they apologize and you still find yourself walking on eggshells, if you still feel unsafe or unsure, that is not love, that is manipulation, period. Sign 4. They only apologize when you leave, never when they're hurting you. You cry, they go silent. You express your pain, they say you're overreacting. You speak up, they get defensive or dismissive. And only when you finally walk away, only when you cut contact or show that you're serious about moving on, do they suddenly find the words, "I'm sorry." The question is, would they have ever apologized if you hadn't left? Someone who only apologizes when they've lost access to you, not when they actually hurt you, isn't truly sorry. They're simply reacting to losing control, not reflecting on the pain they caused. Sign 5. Their apology comes with the expectation that you'll take them back. They say sorry, but it's loaded with conditions. "I already apologized. What more do you want? If you forgive me, then give me another chance. If you really loved me, you wouldn't walk away over something like this. They treat the apology like a transaction, as if saying, "I'm sorry," entitles them to your heart again. But love isn't a deal. You have the right to forgive and still walk away. You can understand and still say no. You can let go of the pain and still protect your peace. A real apology does not obligate you to return. And if someone makes you feel guilty for not wanting to come back, that's not love, that's manipulation, plain and simple. So remember this. A sincere apology is never rushed. It doesn't pressure. It doesn't twist your emotions to force a response. And it never makes you feel like the villain for choosing to say no. You have every right to listen. You have every right to forgive. And you have every right to walk away without looking back. Because the peace you fought to rebuild, with your tears, your strength and your courage, is far too precious to trade away. But two words they've learned how to say, but never learned how to live. Would you like me to continue with? And even after recognizing all the signs of a manipulative apology, a part of you might still wonder, am I being too harsh? If I've forgiven them, shouldn't I give them a second chance? That's when you need to remember forgiveness does not mean reopening the door. Forgiveness is something you do for yourself, not to make the other person feel better, not to mend something that's already broken, but to free yourself from the weight of bitterness. Forgiveness is a way of saying to yourself, I choose peace. I will no longer carry this pain with me. But forgiving does not mean you have to return to the person who caused it. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not just to forgive, but to forgive and still walk away. Others may tell you you're being cold, that you're unforgiving, that if someone says sorry, and if you're a good person, you should give them another chance. But here's the truth, coming back isn't a measure of compassion. Coming back without real change is just another round of the same damage. You don't need to relive the past just because someone learned how to say, I'm sorry. You don't need to gamble the peace you've rebuilt just to try again with someone who once shattered you. You can understand their regret, you can believe in their sincerity, and you can still say, I forgive you, but I'm not coming back, because forgiveness is an act of liberation, and returning is a choice. And that choice must be built on safety, respect, and real transformation, not guilt, emotional pressure, or obligation. Those who once manipulated you might not understand this. They'll try to make you feel guilty for not fully forgiving. They'll ask, if you forgive me, why can't we start over? If you've let it go, then why won't you give me a chance? But pause and ask yourself, if they've truly changed, would they be pressuring me right now? If this is real love, why does it feel like a negotiation? To forgive someone without returning to them is not cruelty. It is a sign of deep self-awareness and healing. It is choosing not to re-enter a space that once stole your sense of self. You've gone back before. You've believed in apologies before. You've trusted promises before and ended up stitching together the same old wound with new hope. But this time, you choose differently. This time, you choose not to repeat the cycle. You choose to protect the peace that cost you your breakdowns, your sleepless nights, your spiritual awakening. You choose to move on, not because you hate them, but because you finally learned to love yourself more. Not everyone will understand this decision. They'll say you're being distant, that you've changed, that you're punishing them, but they haven't lived your story. They don't know how many nights you cried. They don't know how hard you fought to feel whole again, after each apology turned into another disappointment. So no, they don't get to judge when you say, I forgive you, but I'm not coming back. It's a quiet ending. No yelling, no drama, no need to prove who was right. Just a simple, grounded truth. Not everyone who apologizes deserves another chance. And if today is standing at a crossroads, forgive and return or forgive and release, ask yourself one thing. Am I still myself when I'm with this person? If the answer is no, then you already know what you need to do. And the most powerful part? You don't need anyone's permission to walk away. In the end, what terrifies a narcissist isn't your screaming. It's not the long texts you used to send. It's not your efforts to prove they were wrong. What truly makes them tremble is when you look them in the eye, no longer angry, no longer broken, no longer hoping, and say, with unshakable calm, this space is no longer open for manipulation. Because in that moment, you are no longer the person who once cried to be understood, begged to be chosen, or tried to earn their love. You become someone they can no longer control. And to someone who feeds off your emotional chaos, your inner peace is their greatest loss. So don't fear their silence. Don't doubt yourself when they try to come back with remorse. Don't soften when they pull you toward the same old game. You now hold what they cannot break: a sentence, a boundary, a decision. And if you've ever believed you had to do something dramatic to reclaim your power, remember this: sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to play. If this message resonates with you, hit subscribe so you never miss content that helps you heal and reclaim your strength. Drop a comment below: I no longer participate in manipulation, and share this video with someone who's still trying to escape the grip of a toxic dynamic. You don't need to shout to reclaim your power. Sometimes, when your silence is wrapped in a clear boundary, they hear it louder than anything you've ever said.